is here. Juan Fernando's here. I have loads of colleagues online.
Good morning and welcome to this press conference. For your information, we have interpretation in English, French, German and Spanish. As you all know, MEPs and representatives of the Spanish President of the Council and the Commission have been negotiating over the last 2 days and nights on the legislative files of the Migration and Asylum Pact. I have here today the President of the European Parliament, Roberta Metsola, and the rapporteurs of 3 of the legislative files, who will give you an overview of the outcome of the talks and answer to any questions that you may have. I pass now the floor to President Metsola.
Thank you very much and good morning to you all. Today is truly a historic day. I am surrounded by colleagues who have not slept for days and nights in a very, I would say, also emotional moment. I start from a personal angle. You know, I come from an island in the Mediterranean, and I know exactly what it means when we say that we have finally delivered on the Migration and Asylum Pact, probably the most important legislative deal of this mandate. It was the #1 concern of our citizens in 2019. It still remains the #1 concern for many. So this is an agreement that is more than 10 years in the making. One thing that, when I came to the Parliament 10 years ago, was the first issue I spoke about. I would never have thought it would have taken us 10 years to say we managed. Now, the Parliament came to this negotiation on the Migration Pact with a very pragmatic line. Europe needs a robust legislative framework that is the same in all member states, one that functions and that protects, an approach that is humane and fair with those who are seeking of protection, that is firm with those who are not eligible, and that is strong with those who exploit the most vulnerable. My colleagues have managed to find a balance between solidarity and responsibility across all files. It was not easy, but it only makes this achievement even more important. We have defied the odds and proven that Europe can deliver on the issue that matters to citizens. This package will really make a difference. Taking it back quickly, in September 2022, we signed, together with 5 rotating council presidencies, an unprecedented joint roadmap in order to adopt the reform before the end of this year. We just about made it, but it also means that we can manage to showcase this unprecedented reform before next year's elections. And we really, I think, have shown that where there is a political will, there is a way. Now, we are aware that there is no perfect solution. It is not a perfect package on the table, and it does not look at the solutions to all complex issues. But what we do have on the table is far better for all of us than we have had previously. We can demonstrate that Europe has the solutions and that Europe can deliver. I would like to extend my warmest thanks to the rapporteurs, Thomas Tobé, Juan Fernando López Aguilar, Fabienne Keller, Birgit Sippel and Jorge Buxade Villalba, who have worked so hard to achieve this result. I also want to make a mention to Sophie in 't Veld, Matthias Nemetz and Malin Björk, whose files are already in the agreement, but which have remained open as the pact needed to move as a package. I also want to express thanks to Elena Yoncheva, who coordinated the Asylum Contact Group on all these files. Of course, this is thanks also due to consecutive presidencies. Last but not least, the Spanish ambassador and his team in particular, Commissioner Johansson and Vice President Skinas, all the negotiating teams, our administrators and assistants who have worked tirelessly to reach this provisional agreement. I wish good luck for the Belgian presidency now and the teams in finalising the work and bringing these files across the finishing line. And the Belgian Prime Minister assured me last week during the European Council that he was ready to take it on from the Spanish one. Last word, we can really be proud of Europe today. The agreement before the end of this year is a huge success for the constructive pro-European centre. Ahead of an election year in Europe, we had promised it to our citizens, and now we are delivering. It all comes down to Europe taking the lead, and we do it our way. We do it responsibly by addressing topics that are important for our people. So I'll stop here and give the floor to the rapporteurs.
Yeah, Mr. Tobé, rapporteur for the regulation on asylum and migration management. Please, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, President. I must say that I fully agree that I feel proud today, proud for Europe. After 7 years of political deadlock, we're finally there. We did it. And I think we are really at a crossroad now. We either are on the path there where member states independently try to handle the migration issue, or we try to find different ad hoc solutions. But now finally we will have a comprehensive approach, both when it comes to the internal and external dimension, that we will work together and we will cooperate. And I strongly believe that this will rebuild trust. Not only rebuild trust between member states, but also rebuild trust from citizens that wants us to handle migration in a better way. The RAM file, AMMR, depending on your favorite frame to say it, it has been very tough negotiations, let me be clear on that. But I must say that I'm very thankful to all my shadows, the support from the President, the support from Commission and also Council, to finally make the perfect balance that makes us build a majority that I hope going to be strong behind this migration pact. We will now finally have a binding solidarity mechanism. This is not a small thing. This will mean that we will finally have every member state actually taking responsibility, not only a few member states. Yes, this will be done through flexible and voluntary contributions. I would like from the European Parliament to raise one specific question that was one that we negotiated to the very end, that was extremely important for the European Parliament. And that is, of course, that we have many member states that come under specific migratory pressure due to search and rescue. And I think it is clear now that what you will find also in the agreement, we have now finally a recognition that we have member states that are under a special migratory pressure due to SAR, and we will also have a clear earmarking percentage of the solidarity pool that we will establish. This will mean a lot for many countries, and specifically I would like to mention Italy. Lastly, I would like to say that I also think this is, of course, about making the situation better for everyone. I would say for migrants that are now in the hands of smugglers. Many of them even, unfortunately, die on the Mediterranean Sea. We are now slowly taking back the control from the smugglers when it comes to migration in Europe. We will do it with cooperation in third countries, but also make sure that we have a policy that will work also on the ground. Thank you.
Mr. López Aguilar, Rapporteur for the Crisis and Force Majeure Regulation. Please, you have the floor.
Good morning to you all, and thank you for attending. It is my honor and my pleasure to share this podium with President of the European Parliament Roberta Metsola and my colleagues Thomas Tobé and Fabian Keller, excusing those rapporteurs who couldn't make it, because we are coming right of the conclusion of a lengthy, extremely hard working negotiation. For the last couple of days, I kept saying good evening, good morning in continuation, non-stop, because we have not slept a wink in the last couple of days. 2 nights, overnight, negotiating round the clock. And coming out of this negotiation being concluded, it is understandable that we are not here to lecture on the technical details, but to make a political assessment. And my political assessment is that, finally, we came to rules which are to be in place, binding for all the member states. So overcoming a situation which has been described not only as unsatisfactory, but untenable. A situation that we have seen so far, a sequence of action-reaction, no strategy, no far-sighted European scale of response. That means individual member states left on their own, European citizens crying out, "Where is Europe?" whenever they have seen themselves in such situations in dire straits. You talked of Malta, you come from an island that have seen it real tough. I come from an island too, the Canaries, who have seen it real tough. And I have heard that cry many times, where is Europe? Where is the European scale of response? We are putting it in place. We are building up a system. Not easy to negotiate hand in hand 5 regulations and, by the same token, getting back on track some pending files of the last mandate which resulted in failure. We're making a difference in this mandate because this mandate is not resulting in failure. We are putting up a system of regulations which are particularly binding for the member states. They are all intertwined. So let me just reassure you that we made the right choice by endorsing the package approach which we have combined with the Council. All the presidencies in a roadmap, starting with the French presidency and now the negotiation concluded under the Spanish presidency, but to be adopted through the next Belgian presidency in this mandate of the European Parliament. So in this mandate, the outcome is not failure, it's success, because we are putting in place regulations combined all together. RAM, which is Regulation on Asylum Migration Management, APR, Asylum Procedure Regulation, Eurodac Screening, and the Crisis Regulation, which is the regulation of which I have been in charge. Crisis Regulation is a particularly effective scale of solidarity response. It enhances solidarity. In the Commission recommendation, it enhances solidarity, going beyond the fair share of individual member states and responding to the call of solidarity by a member state which faces some kind of a mass influx of arrivals into its external border. Combined with force majeure and the instrumentalization as an assumptions, we have put in place, first of all, solidarity mechanism, enhanced solidarity responses when a country sees itself in a crisis situation. Then prima facie international protection. That was a very strong point for the negotiating team of the European Parliament, so that member state could provide immediate protection to certain categories of vulnerable human beings. Prima facie international protection. Maybe because they're coming from a third country which deserves special attention, or because they fit into categories that have been set by the European Commission, and especially vulnerable, they are to be granted prima facie international protection. Then, of course, we have discussed derogations, and through the negotiation, we have been extremely hard. We have come to limit the derogations that were called by the member states, because the member states in crisis argue that they need extended timelines in order to meet the requirements of the general asylum system. When it comes to registration, when it comes to border procedure, we have worked real hard in order to limit the claim of member states to have derogations. And then, as a positive assessment in all of the crises, I would highlight the relevance of including search and rescue operation in a situation of crisis. That is particularly meant for the so-called frontline member states, those leaning on the Mediterranean, and Spain leaning not only to the Mediterranean but also to the Atlantic, which happens to be the most perilous and deadly route to the European Union. Search and rescue operations and crisis can be declared because of a regional or local level, so it doesn't need to be national. It's a certain region, let alone say the Canaries or the Aegean Islands or Pelagic Islands in Italy, That is also an assumption in order to call for a especially effective solidarity response. And finally, ensuring fundamental rights of the applicants. That had been a point very strongly made by the European Parliament negotiating team, so that certain vulnerable situations, including minors, unaccompanied minors, and minors underage with family members, are to be granted a special consideration even when the derogations are implemented. And all it's to be taken care by a European relocation coordinator, which is a new institution, a new body in place, in order precisely to provide for help to reach out for the member states and make sure that solidarity responses are implemented. So the point I'm making is that should we have not come to this positive outcome in this negotiation, that would have been, in my view, a serious major blow to the European cause. But it didn't happen. What is happening is that we finally achieved it. And so we're sending a message that finally the European Union is to honour the mandate of Article 80 of the Treaty Functioning of the European Union, striking some kind of an acceptable, reasonable balance between shared responsibility and solidarity, binding solidarity, obligatory solidarity when it needed. Thank you.
Madame Keller, Rapporteur for the Asylum Procedures Regulation, you have the floor.
Merci beaucoup. Je vais, si vous le voulez bien, m'exprimer en français. Ça va changer un peu de langue. À mon tour de vous dire, voilà notre émotion d'avoir obtenu un deal. Émotion d'autant plus grande qu'effectivement on est un peu affecté par le manque de sommeil. Notre joie et frustration, ou difficulté à la fois, parce que construire un compromis, accepter un accord, c'est aussi renoncer et puis obtenir. Et nous pouvons être très fiers d'avoir un corpus de textes, un ensemble de textes et 10 textes vraiment européens. Pour la plupart, à l'exception de 2, ce sont des règlements. Donc ce seront les mêmes règles qui s'appliqueront dans tous les États membres. Et ça, c'est une avancée majeure face à cette immense contradiction que nous vivons depuis une trentaine d'années. La zone Schengen, libre circulation, gérée entièrement à l'échelle européenne, et puis l'asile et la migration, une compétence fondamentalement nationale, même si des directives étaient déjà applicables. S'agissant de mon texte, c'est un texte qui porte sur les procédures. Elle prévoit donc que dans l'enchaînement de l'enregistrement de toutes les entrées irrégulières aux frontières, c'est le texte screening, une procédure accélérée à la frontière pour les personnes qui ont peu de chances d'obtenir le statut de réfugié. C'est une disposition importante qui va nous permettre de gérer mieux et plus efficacement des procédures complètes avec l'ensemble des droits des personnes respectés, mais sans tarder, dans un délai maximum de 6 mois, procédure, appel et retour inclus. Le reste des personnes seront intégrées dans la procédure ordinaire. Ces procédures seront aussi plus efficaces pour tous. Nous avons mis une série de délais en place, d'exigences. Ce texte intègre également un ensemble de droits supplémentaires, une aide juridique pour chacun dès la phase administrative. Elle n'était pas octroyée jusque-là, de manière à ce que les personnes connaissent parfaitement leurs droits, puissent être informées et conseillées. Tous les mineurs obtiendront un représentant, c'est-à-dire une personne adulte, compétente, nommée pour la représenter, considérant que, puisque c'est un mineur, voilà, il a besoin d'être épaulé. Il y a aussi un droit à être entendu, droit à recevoir les explications sur les procédures et un monitoring global des droits fondamentaux. Là, je voudrais, en tant que plutôt que de shadow du règlement RAM de Thomas, dire combien la solidarité obtenue de haute lutte est un pas considérable en avant
et sa gouvernance, qui a fait l'objet de longues discussions centrales, comme le dispositif qu'il a évoqué s'agissant des personnes arrivant à la suite d'un sauvetage en mer en grand nombre. Je voudrais vous dire que je suis profondément humaniste et cette loi, avec mon groupe Renew, et cette loi respecte pleinement nos valeurs. Elle a été construite sur une majorité classique au Parlement européen, autour du centre, rassemblant socialistes, centristes et PPE, et c'est cela les majorités robustes et qui représentent bien, laissant tomber les extrêmes, de droite ou de gauche, le cœur des électeurs européens et donc la majorité au Parlement européen. Donc, pour toutes ces raisons, nous pouvons nous réjouir d'être ici ce matin, tous ensemble, entourant la présidente qui n'a pas épargné son énergie pour nous fédérer, pour nous réunir à des moments délicats au cours des 3 années et demie passées.
We have now time for questions. Please state your name and the media you work for. If you are connected remotely, please turn on the camera and press the speak button when given the floor. We have a question there.
Thank you very much, Vincenzo Genovese from Euronews. Thank you all and congratulations. I have some questions for Mr. Tobé. If in the RAM is still there the comprehensive pool of 30,000 relocation per year, and if it's still there the financial contribution of 20,000 euro for each relocation that a member state doesn't want to take in. Then for Mr. Lopez Aguilar on crisis regulation, is there any specific case in which relocation are mandatory at all? I mean, they cannot be replaced by any financial contribution, by any other kind of help. And then if you can please explain how is triggered the crisis situation and who is deciding when to trigger it. Thank you very much.
Okay, I will start then on the first questions. Yes, I can confirm that in the solidarity pool we have kept the number of 30,000 and also the number of 600 million euros that is in the text. And of course, this is the minimum. You have all the opportunities, of course, if we're in a situation where we can see that the needs are bigger, the opportunity is there, but this will be the minimum. We have accepted this from the European Parliament side, and for us, the main focus when it comes to the solidarity pool was, as I mentioned in my introduction, to secure that we have a quicker and more robust support when it comes to disembarkation and search and rescue operations.
And as to the question related to the crisis regulation and the solidarity measures, let me just reinstate that you see us here, lawmaking process live on the stage. This is how it is, the European Union. We adopted a mandate of the European Parliament in which relocations were the mandatory solidarity, and that was the ultimate expression of solidarity in the crisis regulation. And then came the Council, which is also in place, resisting the mandatory relocation solidarity as the only possible choice. So we have strived real hard for years. It's been a hell of a fight, real tug of war in order to come with a response that is accepted by both institutions, the Council and the European Parliament, which is to have the final say when it comes to the second reading of the legislative procedure. And that final outcome means that first, the Commission proposal in its implementing decision will propose the solidarity measures to meet the requirements by the member state which claims itself in a crisis situation. Second, there will be first choice the use of the pledges available in the solidarity pool, which is stated in the RAM regulation. Then, right afterward, if there are enough if there is not enough response in the solidarity pool in order to cover all the needs, then Member States will be requested by the Commission to pledge additional solidarity measures adopting to be incorporated in the Council implemented decision, which is to be proposed by the Commission. And if there is not enough pledges in the Council implemented decision, all the needs to meet all the needs of the Member State, then there will be the mandatory responsibility, so-called offset, to be activated. That means that the contributing Member States shall take responsibility first for all the international protection situation in which the Member States facing a situation of crisis has been determined as responsible, and to the relocation needs identified to address the situation of crisis. And second, where necessary, the contributing Member States shall take responsibility beyond the fair share, which is the one to be assessed by the Commission. You mentioned some equation. There is a solidarity pool by 30,000, and if not, there will be some. But that is a calculation. That is an estimation. It's not written. So the thing is that once the Commission takes hold of the situation, it will call for the Member States to come with additional solidarity pledges. And of course, the priority that has been a fight in the crisis situation will be mandatory relocation programs. Mandatory, that will be the priority. That will be the priority, so that certain categories of people, particularly international applicants, will be preferred by the Member States, and then the Commission will make sure that the Member States will go beyond the so-called fair share as to solidarity response.
We have now a question from David Carreta online. David, if you...
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me well? Yes, thank you very much. Thank you, David Carretta, Radio Radicale. Je vais poser ma question en français, si je peux. Un des arguments a été avancé pour l'adoption du nouveau pacte sur migration et asile, c'est faire barrage à l'extrême droite. Et la présidente l'a dit, c'est une victoire pour le centre politique. Mais en lisant le jugement que beaucoup d'experts et au moins 50 ONG ont donné de ce texte, ils disent deux choses. Ça ne va pas marcher en cas d'afflux massif. Et deuxièmement, l'Europe sacrifie ses valeurs, les droits fondamentaux. Je voulais vous demander une réaction à cette critique et pourquoi le citoyen européen devrait choisir la copie de ce que propose l'extrême droite par rapport à l'original. Merci.
Et vous avez adressé la question à qui exactement?
I can start by answering.
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Yeah. Okay, so thank you for this question, and then I will leave my colleagues to come in. I think it is worth underlining once again the difficulty with which, you have to go through in order to reach an agreement. That we, from the European Parliament's perspective, insisted on all these legislative instruments remaining interlinked and connected together, because the risk would have been that we would have either advanced on the asylum files and not the security files, or on the security files and not on the asylum files, with the impossibility to find a majority in this Parliament or in the Council. My colleagues also said and made specific reference to the insistence by the Parliament, whether during the border procedure, I know Fabienne will probably go through this as well, through the insistence on a binding solidarity mechanism. This was the Parliament's demand from the very beginning. To the respect for fundamental rights for applicants. Also, Juan Fernando said it, one of the Parliament's insistent points on which it insisted. All of these would not have been there if it were not for the Parliament to have negotiated until the very end. And that should not be underestimated. I said in my opening remarks that this package is not, the policy and how we try to legislate and legislate a very complex issue is never perfect. But let's not underestimate the risk of, if we had not reached such a deal as happened in 2017, when we went into an election campaign in 2019, the number one concern of citizens in almost all member states was migration, and we did not have a legislative response as co-legislators in the European Union to it. So one could always say, yes, let's see where we go in the future. In Fabienne's instrument, you know, there is provisions on safe third countries, which will still have to be implemented. We can also talk about how much more we need to do on returns, how much more we need to discuss with our third country neighbours. But let's also not underestimate. This means that hopefully member states will feel less inclined to reintroduce internal borders because the influx is being managed. This means that smuggling operations will not be able to operate as they've been operated so far. These are all things that we would also urge those organisations that are looking, and I'm sure they will look at all the technical detail of what our colleagues have managed in the last few hours, in order not to discredit a pact that really brought the centre together, and it's a centre that does not copy the right but actually goes on pragmatism.
Mr. Tobé, please.
Yeah, I don't share the opinion that we are going away from our values or fundamental rights. I think that is clear if you go through the text. I mean, I can respect that we have colleagues in this House that are not happy with the result, and they might not even support the migration pact. But for me, this really comes down to, I think, the time for speeches about migration is over. We know all the speeches, and we have listened to them for many, many years now. And it could be from populist parties, or it could be from others. And this really comes down to, do you want to have a proper European solution or not? That is basically what this comes down to. And of course, there are some proposals we would like to have seen in another way from the European Parliament. But we achieve the big things. We achieved that we will finally have all member states in. We will finally have everyone taking some kind of responsibility. Yes, it is flexible. Yes, it is voluntary. But it will mean a lot. We will finally work together, and I think that is the most important thing today.
If you may, I would argue the simplification of the assumption that this package would be ideologically oriented or serving the purpose of the extreme right. On the contrary. First of all, when we're talking about binding rules, we're talking about binding rules of all the member states, regardless the political colour or orientation of the relevant governments in place. And believe me, there are many, because migration and asylum have proved the most divisive issue in the European agenda. What are we doing here? Precisely, we are coming up with a European scale of response, which is exactly the opposite of the ultimate agenda of the far right, which is precisely going national, going back to national. That is a dystopia, not only because it ignores the rules on which the European area of liberty, justice and security is founded, including the rule of fair shared responsibility and solidarity when it comes to migration and asylum policy and lawmaking, but also the very idea of a European scale of response. That is actually the positive side of this whole thing. And let me add something. If I hear some opinions that they are not happy with this package or with this agreement and the compromises underlying, I would argue that is precisely the point. None of us is happy. But when you come to a negotiating round in which you see a variety of political groups, and you see 27 member states represented in the Council, and you see a sequence of rotating presidency making points on behalf of two institutions which are to be put in line if we want to have European legislation, that is precisely the point of compromising. No one can come out from this negotiation entirely happy. No one can have it its own way. But it's absolutely untrue that this package denies EU values. On the contrary, it reaffirms EU values, including fundamental rights, precisely because we are finally putting in place legislation which is binding for all the member states, including human rights, fundamental rights considerations. And that is precisely the aim of this whole negotiation we're coming from, and that is the difference we're making. Because the situation where we're coming from is precisely a situation of anomia, a situation in which member states have been inclined or even incited to act on their own, with individual, fragmented, non-systemic reactions, instead of a European system of response, which is the one we're trying to put in place here.
Oui, merci beaucoup. Vous posez la question d'un projet qui reprendrait les propositions de l'extrême droite. Moi, j'ai bien regardé, je n'ai pas vu beaucoup de membres du groupe ID présents dans les négociations. Ils dénoncent les problèmes, mais sont absents pour construire les solutions. C'est normal, ils se nourrissent du problème. Sur le fond, ces textes ont un vrai équilibre, checks and balances, entre l'organisation, la fixation de règles qu'on applique. Et moi, j'ai un règlement qui est un règlement qui réglemente les procédures, leurs délais, leurs rigueurs. Oui, toutes les personnes qui vont entrer sur le territoire européen de manière irrégulière seront enregistrées. Nous devons savoir qui est sur notre territoire. Mais ces personnes auront aussi des droits, je les ai décrits tout à l'heure, je les rappelle, une aide juridique dans l'ensemble de la phase de l'asile et le monitoring des droits fondamentaux pour qu'ils soient réels. Gérer plus rapidement les personnes qui ont très peu de chances d'avoir l'asile, c'est aussi faire que nos systèmes d'asile soient moins encombrés par des personnes nombreuses qui attendent des délais beaucoup trop longs, qui sont en fait inhumains, qui leur sont imposés. Gérer des procédures efficacement, complètement, mais avec rigueur. C'est aussi faire en sorte qu'il y ait à un moment donné moins de personnes présentes dans les procédures et donc qu'elles puissent être mieux accueillies, mieux respectées. Enfin, il y a un point assez important qui est la question de la mise en œuvre de ces règles. Les règles, c'est bien. La réalité, le suivi, la pratique de leur mise en œuvre sera essentielle. Et nous, au Parlement européen, nous nous sommes engagés à assurer un suivi, déjà dans la phase préparatoire, puisqu'il y a un différé, dans l'application des règlements, puis ensuite dans la mise en œuvre des textes. C'est la réalité vécue par les personnes qui sera tout à fait centrale.
We have another question in the room, please. Go ahead.
Markus Becker with Der Spiegel. My colleague mentioned it earlier that a big number of experts are saying that this reform will change little on the ground. But let's assume for a second they're all wrong, and it will change a lot. Still, you already mentioned it, Madam President, for example, that these rules will have to be implemented next year by the Belgian presidency. It will take time. So what exactly do you think will change on the ground that will convince people before the European elections that this is a reform that shows the EU works and this is not a reform that does not work, where the right-wing parties could seize on that fact and say, see people, they are agreed on this reform and nothing changes on the ground, so vote for us?
So, for me, on this, my colleague said it in the responses to the previous question. I mean, we are here to build rather than destroy. We face, in this Parliament, but also we see it in different national, situations, where the extremes of the political spectrum would vote against anything, simply because for them it is better as their platform for the European elections to say that they are against rather than they are for. 2019, all of us were candidates then, was not an easy election campaign, because precisely then we needed to face the fact that from a legislative perspective, and let's not forget this is our core role, we had not managed to find a deal with the Council and spent years saying that the situation is blocked and who's to blame and which group could have done better, etc. This is not the case today. And I think we should welcome this today. It is a historic day, not for nothing, that you had, after years of deadlock, light, I would say, at the end of the tunnel. And this brings those five presidencies into the spectrum, because these five presidencies are also led by prime ministers or presidents that will go into the European elections and say, we worked on migration and made a deal. Now, changing on the ground, what I would wish, I would tell you, is that we would have less situations where leaders of countries find no option but to go it alone, where they feel excluded and their citizens feel that there's no European solution. Search and rescue was mentioned, avoiding deaths was mentioned. 10 years ago, we had Lampedusa tragedy. How have we made sure that smugglers will no longer continue to have such a profitable business? When you have the possibility of member states working together, at the moment they find themselves in a situation where they present themselves with an influx at their border, an internal one, and they close it. This pact aims to resolve that. And that is not nothing. 7 pieces of legislation, actually 8, even if we refer, for example, to Eurodac, which has been on hold for a very long time, finally a deal on it, in order also for it to be balanced with our aims as a parliament, is something that was important for frontline member states, but also important for member states that are, let's say, on the secondary step of receiving migrants. Where do we go next? How do we talk to our neighbouring third countries? Agreements that are made with them. This is all the next step that would not have been possible without this pact. And I think that rather than today give a platform to those who are saying that this is not a good enough deal, to those that are saying that this will not work, because that will go straight into the laps of those who precisely don't want it to work, because they run election campaigns on populist intolerance rhetoric. And that's not something that this stage is shared by. And we, my colleagues, represent the 3 groups in the House, but have also found majorities in this House that will hopefully, we need to work on a majority in the plenary in the spring, in order for us to go just before the elections with a vote that is strong, that is clear, and that is reflected by a vote in the Council that is strong and that is clear, because governments also need to play their part. But as co-legislators, we have done ours, and I think we should be proud of it.
Mr. López Aguilar,
yes, please. You've raised a very challenging question, and I will be particularly blunt. This mandate started in 2019, and for good reason. This European Parliament requested Ursula von der Leyen, in order to be invested President of the forthcoming Commission, to come up with an actual European common asylum system. The situation where we're coming from was a situation where there were directives in place and one regulation, the so-called Dublin regulation, which lies the responsibility of not only granting international protection or asylum to the country of first entry, but the whole responsibility of the procedure and the services entailed to the country of first entry, which led to a dynamic of a continuation of rebuttals and even arguments within the Council that I have seen live representing the European Parliament and the Council of Ministers of Justice on the grounds of so-called secondary movements. Then we actually asked for a system which is now coming in regulations, which are particularly binding legislative acts for all the member states directly. They don't need transposition. And you know what? We're overcoming Dublin, because now that rule of simply lying the whole responsibility on the country of first entry is going to be superseded by RAM, by the regulation of asylum migration. That is a difference. And you know what? I'm coming from the Canary Islands. And whenever there is a search and rescue operation, which is an everyday situation in the Canaries, because believe me, they come by thousands every weekend in the Canaries, the whole response lies on Spain. And the whole solidarity lies on the Spanish internal solidarity we call derivation programs. And you know what? From now on, facing a search and rescue operation, there will be a European scale of response finally there will be a relocation program, European scale, not only Spanish relocation program called derivation. That is a difference. That is a huge difference. You're asking what is going to change? This is a change. Regulations which are binding, which don't need transposition, don't need 2 years of transposing directives, and again, a dynamic of appeals before the European Court of Justice for those countries in violation of their obligations to comply with the directives is going to be effective once they are finally adopted. And the whole system, consisting of 5 regulations, is going to make a difference. Of course, needless to say, that at European scale, there is no such thing as a miracle overnight. It's not going to happen in 24 hours, but certainly it's going to make a difference as to the situation we're coming from.
Peut-être très rapidement, oui. Et merci d'avoir envisagé cette hypothèse. L'idée vraiment, le principe fondamental, c'est d'entrer dans une autre organisation de l'asile et de la migration. La question, ce n'est pas de répondre à un problème. L'asile et la migration, c'est une réalité de l'humanité depuis toujours. Donc, le défi, et ce que nous avons pris en main ici, c'est l'idée de la gérer en européen, et plus chacun à l'échelle nationale avec des éléments européens. C'est vraiment en européen. Et le défi de la mise en œuvre concrète de ce pacte, c'est qu'effectivement les procédures soient plus efficaces, qu'on ait de meilleures conditions d'accueil, que les droits des personnes soient mieux respectés. Et aux 50 ONG que vous évoquez, qui dénoncent aujourd'hui certains aspects du pacte, nous les connaissons, elles travaillent sur le terrain, on a dialogué avec elles. Moi-même, j'ai fait une évaluation pendant 1 an de Dublin. On sait bien que le système actuel n'est pas satisfaisant. Donc oui, nous voulons sortir d'un certain nombre de dysfonctionnements et de situations humaines extrêmement difficiles. J'ai envie de leur proposer de nous aider, de nous accompagner dans ces temps de construction, il y aura un temps intermédiaire de préparation de la mise en application des textes, ensemble de construire une bonne application rigoureuse et totalement respectueuse des droits de l'homme. Elle est prévue pour ça. On a besoin d'eux, par exemple, le legal counseling pour tout le monde. On nous dit, oh là là, on ne trouvera pas tous les conseils, etc. Si on peut, avec les ONG, travailler pour qu'il y ait des possibilités concrètes de mise à disposition de personnes, d'associations qui puissent leur délivrer ce conseil, alors on aura progressé dans l'effectivité du droit des migrants à connaître le système juridique et l'ensemble de leurs droits.
Mr. Tobe, please.
Yes, thank you. I just want to make one thing clear from my side. This has never, for me, been about a strategy for the next European election, or that we have a rise of populist parties in Europe. For me, this has been on the content that we need a European migration policy. And I think that is also important to remember. And I would also say, we will see in the vote later on, I think with the 3 responsible groups that you can see up here today, we will work hard to get even more support. We might even also get support from some responsible parties, also from the ECR group. Let's see. I think the most important thing here is content, and it's the division if you want to have a European migration policy or not. That is what this will be about, and that is what's going to be clear in the vote, I would say, in plenary.
We have now a few more questions online. I will group them. So please, I will ask you to say who you're addressing the question to. Please, Maria Sara.
Hello, thanks for the floor. I hope you hear me. Maria Sara with FC Newspaper Greece. I have 2 questions. The first is for Mrs. Keller. I wanted you to confirm if it is true that the first-line countries will be required to build prison-like reception centres on their borders to register migrants and process their asylum claims. Will Greece need to build even more? Because now we have facilitation centres for migrants that arrive to the Greek islands. Should Greece, for example, build another building like a prison for the people that will not be identified as asylum seekers. And the second question is more political. I think that Madam Metsola, President Metsola, could answer how the European Parliament would press the Commission and the Member States to implement this new law, because we have seen in the past problems with the implementation of for example, rule of law conditionality. Member States will try to avoid the implementation of this law. So how would the European Parliament press the Member States to implement it? Thank you.
Thank you, Maria. And we also have Philippe Cousin. Please, Philippe.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So my question is, well, your best guess when it comes to when you think the main parts of the pact will be implemented and put into practice. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And a last one by Eleonora Vasquez. Eleonora, please.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much, Eleonora Vasquez from Euractiv. I have a question to Mr. Aguilar. If in the non-state actor definition was exempted NGOs, one question for Mr. Tobe on the solidarity pool, if it is confirmed that that the information of the solidarity pool, so how member states will contribute and how, will be classified information, so we will not have the possibility to see it. And one last question for Mr. Keller, Mrs. Keller, about the possibility of detention during the border procedure. And one last question, actually, for President Metsola on the political approach and the political environment around the pact. Do you think this deal was affected by the election period? Thank you.
Thank you. I will give the floor to the President now.
Yeah, so I will answer two questions, one by Ms. Psara and one by Ms. Vasquez. So how will the European Parliament press the Commission? We will do our job. Huh? We always do our job. You have seen it over the past years. First, where we ask the questions that need to be asked, we push where it needs to be pushed. This was the first demand that we put to the incoming Commission in 2019, that we needed a pact that revisits the deadlock and tries to unblock it, and that's where we are at. Today is really a day which shows and puts paid to the Parliament's role, not only as co-legislator but also as one of scrutiny and inquiry. There will always be member states that either try to push back the deadline or try not to implement. But this is legislation and there's a procedure for that. The Commission is guardian of the treaties, it's guardian of the implementation of legislation, and therefore where member states do not implement, then there are measures that are taken as in any other instrument. But I would turn it around. Today you hear, and I was present last week, the European Council, where most of my exchange was dominated by the migration pacts, that there is a real desire by those prime ministers and presidents, heads sitting around the table, to have this pact, to have had an agreement, because they themselves put their European political agenda on this line, because they are against, they are along the years having had to push against the narrative of better to destroy than to build. So Thomas said it earlier, the time for speeches is over, now is the time to implement, and I think it's in the interest of member states to look into really the possibility of having this migration policy that all of us as political representatives that want and believe in Europe have promised to work on. On the political approach, we had a deadline set, which is the end of 2023. This will leave us with the next few months on final sort of legal scrubbing, looking at the recitals, etc., making sure that from a legal linguistic point of view, but also final versions of the texts will match and will be able to be implemented with a vote before the elections. We were pressed for time, of course, but there is no better way than to say that we recognise the urgency and we pushed until we managed. So we will continue to do that until the very end of this mandate, to go to an election campaign with quite a lot of successes underneath our belt, as we would say in English.
Madame Keller, if you want to reply to the questions.
Oui, concernant la journaliste grecque, la construction de reception centers dans les pays de première entrée. Il sera en effet nécessaire d'avoir des lieux d'accueil, à la fois pour pouvoir réaliser le screening et pour accueillir les personnes dans le cadre de la zone d'attente qui est prévue, Fiction of Non-Entry, pour les personnes qui suivront la procédure aux frontières. Mais ces structures ne seront pas forcément physiquement à la frontière puisqu'elles auront besoin de personnel compétent, des éducateurs, des gardiens, des policiers, pour faire à la fois les procédures et accompagner les personnes. La Grèce a déjà un certain nombre de centres, certains seront tout à fait adéquats pour assurer cet accueil. Le mot de détention qu'a utilisé Eleonora de Ractive n'est pas exact. Il s'agit de zones d'attente et toutes les formes de restriction de liberté, y compris les plus faibles, peuvent être utilisées, je pense par exemple à l'assignation à résidence, qui, si l'autorité nationale l'estime, peut être tout à fait suffisante pour des familles qui sont en cours de procédure, qui sont demandeurs et qui, je le rappelle très majoritairement, ne posent aucun problème s'agissant de questions de sécurité. Donc, cette question de la détention, je sais qu'elle est au centre des inquiétudes des ONG. C'est pour cela que je m'engage moi-même à poursuivre le dialogue avec elle à ce sujet pour que les solutions se construisent les unes après les autres et que la gestion se fasse sur le terrain de manière la plus humaine possible, avec de toute façon comme contre-pouvoir ce monitoring qui est dans les textes.
Mr. López Aguilar, you also received questions, please.
Yes, I would like to thank Eleonora Vázquez for the question raised by Euroactive. Yes, there is a triple choice of crisis situation assumptions, crisis, force majeure, and instrumentalization. But when it comes to instrumentalization, the reference to non-state actors has been corrected by the European Parliament. It is referred exclusively and only to hostile non-state actors. And there is a recital making absolutely sure that it will be no grounds, absolutely no grounds for targeting NGOs, particularly humanitarian NGOs, who are absolutely excluded of the instrumentalization response. Having said this, I will add this consideration. Instrumentalization was not in the mandate of the European Parliament, but it is only clear that it was a request, an insistent request, an unconditional request by a relevant number of member states represented in the Council through their governments. And you know what? This is what playing the European game is about. No one is on its own. This European Parliament happens to be the only directly elected democratic institution in the European architecture. And precisely because of it, it's a pluralistic body. We are 700. And you know what? For 40 years, 44 now, it's been directly elected, and no political group has had ever majority to adopt any legislation first reading on its own. It has always requested a combination of political groups summing up compromises. To begin with in the European Parliament, but then comes the conversation with the Council. And you see 27 member states around the table, and they make it clear that for them it's absolutely unconditional to put in place some request of them which was not in our mandate. It is in their mandate. That is the case of instrumentalization. Some member states found instrumentalization absolutely essential for the compromise we've reached. But we have corrected that request by making sure that by no means it will be aiming to non-governmental organizations, NGOs, particularly humanitarian NGOs involved in search and rescue. It will be facilitators of hostile non-state actors. They were referring to some specific organizations which might be in your mind frame, needless to name them, but it's an assumption that is in their consideration and their concern, and that is why we have actually shaped it. But the lesson is clear. The lesson is that when you go the European game, it takes a lot of compromising. That is why whenever you come out from a negotiation so lengthy for 3 whole years, non-stop, relentless, we haven't wasted a single second. Working so hard, you have to come with positions which were not your own, so that you have some gain, you put some added value, you put something into it. And that is why I think every rapporteur and every negotiating team represented by every rapporteur has made throughout this lengthy, extremely cumbersome, extremely tiresome, extremely stressful negotiation. But we made it. So we're making a added value. And just final point, again, on your what is the gain, what is the difference we're making. Think of the opposite. Think what it would have been that after 3 long years of lengthy, tiresome negotiations, we tell the people outside here, we tell our citizens, we tell our constituencies, you know what? We didn't make it at all. We didn't achieve anything. Nothing has been done after all of these years. That would be completely unacceptable as a European response. We made it, and that is a difference.
Please, Mr. Tobe, finally for your questions.
Yes, thank you. I think the question was asked, when will we see this fully implemented in full action? And to be quite clear with you, what we have achieved here today is a political agreement. And the phase that now will come is that we will actually have even more negotiations on the implementation. So if you're not tired of me already, we will meet even more, I would say, for many hours. But we are working around 2 years. But I think this will be outlined in the coming negotiations between us, and we might see that there can be different parts of the pact that can go before others. But of course, we want to have this fully implemented as soon as possible. But this is to be very open with you, the years that we are discussing at the moment. But we will have to negotiate this further also with Council. On the questions of, from what I understand, as you know, the Council's position was to have a Commission recommendation for a Member State. This is now changed to a clear proposal. We do not have in this deal that this will be made public, but we are having an ongoing discussion with Council to make sure that the European Parliament will be informed immediately when it is sent to a Member State. So this is also part of ongoing discussion.
Okay, we need to wrap it here. Just to inform you that we have published a very detailed press release with information on these files, but also on the other 2 that are part of the package, Eurodac reform and screening regulation. We will let the speakers go to their other commitments and to rest. We send you a very good day and an excellent holiday.
Thank you for your attendance and for your questions.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for being so kind. Bye now.
When are you flying?
What a job.
When are you flying?
Right now.